Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome back. Thank you all for joining. Jerry, we have had several different podcasts that deal with design thinking. And on our choice boards, we put it under the critical thinking theme. So if you use our choice boards and listen to our podcasts on the choice boards, go to critical thinking and you'll see all of our design thinking podcasts. But we have another one today and I'm looking forward to it. Did you find this fabulous guest from Dent as well?
Well, of course, Jamie, of course.
Was it actually legit or was it through a cocktail party at Dent? Because usually it's through the cocktail parties.
Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was legit first. And then there was the cocktail party.
Okay.
Yes.
If my memory serves me, it was so legit. It was as soon as we landed at the airport on the shuttle to Dent, we were already connected. So Jerry is quick.
Yes.
She wastes no time, Jessica.
She's good at what she does.
Well, I would like to introduce our audience to Jessica Artiles, who is a design thinker. I did meet her at Dent. I took her workshop and I was very impressed with what I came away with and the content and starting to think differently. And we have talked about design thinking. I'm pretty passionate myself that education systems need to start using design thinking. And so I love speaking with people that speak this language and can enlighten us as to how we could start.
Thank you so much, Jerry and Jamie. It's so nice to be here. I'm apologizing in advance that I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm not bringing my full self, but I'm trying to bring everything I've got, because this is such an important topic to me, and this is such an important audience. I was telling Jerry that my mom is a teacher, my cousin is a teacher. I have been a teacher myself, and I really appreciate the work that goes into everybody that's listening on this podcast, every educator out there. And design thinking is just as important of a topic, and so I hope that everyone can come away with just a little bit understanding that they too can do design thinking. It's not a scary word. It's not a scary thing. We've all been designers before when we were 4 years old, figuring out what the world looks like, investigating, exploring, failing and moving forward with that failure, incorporating that failure. So I hope everyone comes out of here feeling empowered that they too can do design thinking.
Thank you. Yes, I do too.
So my intro to design thinking, well, let's see. I've always been a very critical person, and I thought that was a bad thing for a while because I always had an opinion about things, and it was mostly about how to better do things. I think it was because I grew up being the English speaker for my family for a long time and being the first to speak English to translate the world around us to my immigrant family. And so I would notice that sometimes in messaging or in communications, what was trying to be said wasn't being said the best way possible. And so in my translation of it, I got to be critical about it. And fast forward to being at MIT studying mechanical engineering, I would even start to criticize my professors, and I would think, well, that's not the best way to say that, or that's not going to help us get there. Maybe we should take this route instead. I was sort of becoming a curriculum designer along the way, right? And so I finally took my senior class in mechanical engineering. My senior year was around product development processes. Still didn't even say the word design. And it was all about how do we get to a thing? How do we make a thing? And really what it focused on was the human, right? The human-centered part of this process, which requires you to have incredible empathy, incredible interviewing skills, incredible skills to be able to turn what someone is telling you into an opportunity, a market opportunity. There's this quote, right, that Henry Ford says, if I would have asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse instead of a car, because how can you imagine you need a car if that's not a thing yet, right? So it's really having so much empathy that you can stand there with your user, your customer, and understand their problems and where they're coming from. And I literally started crying in that classroom when I found out that there was a discipline for me to put all of my critical thinking into, and all of my opinions into one place. And I thought, oh my God, this is what it is. It's product design, and by virtue, it's design thinking. Now, I'll take the opportunity to make the clarification. Product design can be sort of this general umbrella term for the practice or the field of designing a thing, a product or service or a good or experience that goes out to a customer. And design thinking can be abstracted as to exactly that, what it takes to think your way through the problem, what it takes to think like a designer. So we call it like design with a small d, because you don't have to be intimidated by architects' big renderings and fancy drawings and blueprints. I certainly can't do those, not well anyway. But you can communicate something, right? If I give you a Post-it note, you can draw a thing on the board and you can say, that's a bird. Now, moving forward, we all know that this is our bird. So we have a common vocabulary. So design is about being so human that you can communicate with the tools that are around you. And that's the key. I know that teachers are so good at using the tools that are around them to create new channels of communications with their students and meeting them where they are, which is why I think they're such a natural fit to be design thinkers. So
teachers are great about that. I mean, they can use tools in ways that, the average person would not think of. But on the other hand, Jessica, teachers are afraid of design thinking. I think it sounds overwhelming. Can you kind of break it down a little bit so that it's not quite, you did a little bit there, but what would you tell a teacher about design thinking that help them get over that fear?
yeah, definitely. I would say that they're not alone. That's the first thing. They're not alone. When I've traveled around the world and I've spread this ideas of design thinking, sort of these intro workshops that you too can be a design thinker. And the first thing we see is design, and then we think art, and we say, oh no, I'm not an artsy person. I'm not an artist. That can't be me. And again, my mission in the world, in my world travels, has been to just break that down and say, we were all design thinkers. We were all trying to figure out the world through experimentation, through trial and error. Since we were kids, we were all design thinkers. And so our challenge is to just reignite that part of our brain that helps us think that way. It's not reimagining a new career. It's not taking on classes that you said no to in college and now you have to take them again. No, it's about, I don't even care that you don't know how to draw. I don't need you to know how to draw. I need you to know how to communicate. And I need you to be able to connect with your audience so that you can communicate with them. And along the way, I am going to sneak in a few visual communication exercises, because with just straight lines and circles, we can do a lot of information. And when you think about it, right, you're building a relationship with your students, you're building a relationship with your audience. If I just draw a circle with two lines and I say, this is going to be our bird, again, the same example here, then my students and I will understand that that's our language now. That's our common place. So now we are already creating trust in our system, trust in our communications, that we are meeting each other where we're at, and we're trying to communicate to the right thing. So I would say, number one, you've already been a design thinker. You were already a design thinker since the day you were born. And then I would go on and say, again, design thinking is about these ways of thinking. It's if you have a growth mindset and if you're someone who likes to learn and see things from different perspectives, then design thinking is just introducing you to a vocabulary of doing these things that you were probably already doing already. The biggest things with design thinking are actually mindsets over methods. And what I mean by that is that there's no prescriptive like step A, step B, step C. It's actually more important that in your approach, you're thinking about things in certain ways. And what are those ways? For example, fail early, fail often. What does that mean? That just means that you're willing to be wrong. You're willing to get something wrong from the beginning, and that it's okay. Of course, you have resistance to that because we all went through a schooling system that did not encourage you to fail. It encouraged you to only get the right answer once and not to experiment to get the right answer. So of course, we all have resistance, but that's exactly the mentality that we're trying to change in our students, because the world that we're preparing them for, Jerry, this world doesn't have a one answer solution that fits in one box perfectly. That stops at schooling, right? The real world requires requires you to try things and to try them. And if you get it wrong, what you just did is that you uncovered information. You discovered one way that it doesn't work. So now you might have another way that it does work. And the mentality of turning that into a positive outcome, into a positive opportunity, already you're doing design thinking.
Right.
We do this right with STEM and STEAM. That's what is happening in there. And I think your point about the fact that we all started as inquisitive people who dove into exploration as children is so important. I mean, and I think when we talked about this with our Think NATO guest, Jerry, but I think the problem is that somewhere along the line, we have a lack of confidence and we have a fear built up in us. There's a lot of, maybe we've hit obstacles in the past and we get discouraged. But I think it's so important to risk takers are the best learners, right? Because we're trying new things. I think we need to get back that risk-taking ability. And I think that fear sometimes holds us back. You also, I think another trick to this is that you have to be a good listener. So in order to have that empathy, you have to be a good listener in order to determine what those needs and wants are. When I was teaching in the 90s, I taught science. So I taught some of this, I tried to. And what STEM and STEAM now used to be called technology education. Everything is in a cycle, right, Jerry? In education, but it was called technology education. And the premise of it was that you had to identify people's needs and wants and satisfy those needs and wants with a solution. And again, that there again is about that empathy, about an authentic need. But it's interesting. My daughter just committed to Georgia Tech, and she switched her major already from environmental engineering to industrial design. So this is going to be her world. And it just, and her sister, my daughter helped her come to this conclusion, just watching the videos and listening and looking at some of the content of the courses. It just looked like such an amazing opportunity to explore and create and just be immersive in what you're doing, but also at the same time connecting with the world and the needs of what, I said, you can go into toy design, into cookware design, you can do anything with this, really just about anything. But it's just about, and the thing that I think is going to be helping her too is because sometimes I know she has great ideas, but she doesn't always vocalize those. And I think, and perhaps you have some suggestions for people like this, because you mentioned it earlier, you have to communicate, right? You have to be able to communicate these. So we listen and we interpret and we understand through empathy the needs, but then once you devise, come up with, problem solve solutions, you have to be able to communicate those. And again, back in the 90s when I was teaching, I went through this amazing professional development opportunity where we went into different companies over the summer, and we got to spend a day at that company and learn about what they're looking for in the workforce. Back then, and even now, it doesn't matter how much time you spend in research and how bright you are, if you can't communicate your thoughts, then you're never going to get this solution across the finish line. So do you see that as a challenge, as a hurdle? And do you have any suggestions for people who just, need to come out of their shell?
Yeah, I love that. It's a great position to be in. It reminds me of this design thinking slogan or mantra or principle. It's sort of this another mindset that we have, which is show, don't tell. And the challenge there, as you can imagine, if you've ever been anywhere near as a sales rep in business, is that to talk your ears off, but you still don't really know what exactly it does or what it looks like or how it can help me. You're just like, they just keep talking about and around this thing. And instead we want to say, just show me what it looks like. And by show me, I also mean if you can draw it out or if you can give me a model of it, something that I can interact with. Not only will I gain a better understanding of your idea, but you're going to gain a better understanding of me interfacing with the idea that you're trying to sell me, because you're going to put this thing in front of me and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna try to open it from here. And you're gonna say, oh, that's not what I expected at all. That doesn't mean that I failed or that you failed. That just means that you just learned something else about your customer and your user, and you just learned on different perspective. And so this whole being critical thing and having many opinions, one of my favorite exercises is to just put something on the middle of a podium, in the middle of a table, in the middle of a classroom, and have everybody circle up around it and just form opinions about it. Just imagine stories about it, because what you're doing there is practicing seeing things from different perspectives. If you were a middle-aged male, what would they think? If you were an elderly woman, what would they think? If you were a transgender child going through high school, what would they think? If you were just like, name all these personas, just imagine all kinds of extreme user cases and try to put yourself in their position. And that's the skill of perspective. That's the skill that we're practicing, which is empathy. So I think design thinking gives an incredible vocabulary or practice skill set to communicating what you're thinking. And it's exactly that. And it's not being afraid of humbling yourself and saying, I don't know how to draw this on the board, but I'm going to draw it anyway. Because as soon as you put a visual on the board, we know this already, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. 1,000 words. You can be so much more efficient if you just drew it to me. And remember, it's not like I'm not judging you for your creative ability, which is sometimes the resistance that we feel when we say, I can't go near design thinking. We're not looking for your artistic ability. We're looking to get on the same page. We're looking so that when I draw that circle in 2 lines, we can all agree that we're talking about this kind of bird. We're not talking about a penguin. We're talking about this kind of bird, something that looks similar to this. Oh, okay, we're talking about the pigeons at the supermarket that are pooping all over my car. Yes, this is the problem that we are talking about. We're not talking about penguins. We love penguins, right? So just getting on the same page about it becomes the important skill that we're talking about.
I love it. I love it. So show, don't tell. It's so key. And it really solves a lot of the problems. And you were going to say something, Jerry, but really quick, because you do keep mentioning drawing and you do keep mentioning that, people say, well, I don't know how to draw. If someone does want to become, get into design thinking and use it to solve problems, and that is a hurdle if they can't draw. So how do you get them to get past that? Because I, for one, am awful. So, and I always have to have that precursor, like, okay,
yeah,
just up front.
warning. So I'll say 2 things, and I'm really glad you asked that, Jamie. The first thing I'll say is that another of these design thinking mindsets and these practices that we try to instill in people is to defer judgment. And what we're talking about there is this sort of idea that we have a left brain and we have a right brain. And some science tries to say it's not exactly left and right. And of course, it's not only left and right. The brain is way more complex than to generalize it like that. But for these intents and purposes, we're going to draw it out as a left brain and a right brain, because we do see that a lot of the critical thinking, a lot of the analytical logic thinking is happening in our left brain. That's what schools have been overtraining our left brain to be active in. And a lot of the right brain is in charge of this sort of creative, artistic pursuit. So when we say deferred judgment, we mean to say, when you have an idea, sometimes you have an idea and you think, no, that's so stupid. I'm not going to say that out loud. Right there, in that moment, you need to stop and you need to catch yourself. And you need to realize that that's your overtrained left brain judging your right brain creative idea. And unfortunately, it's a very lopsided space. We just haven't had as many hours to be sitting in a school environment practicing our right brain. So our left brain thinks it's this know-it-all and is judging what's coming out of your right brain. So in that moment, just like you would say to one student that's talking way too much louder over the other student, in that moment, you need to tell your left brain, excuse me, we're going to defer judgment. And I'm going to put this idea out there. You know why you're going to put that idea out there? Because number one, probably somebody else might have that idea and they're not putting it out there. And what a missed opportunity. But number two, even if it is a sucky idea, it gets the ball rolling. We're not looking for the best ideas. We're actually, another mindset here, we're looking for quantity over quality. Quantity over quality. We don't want the best idea. And what do school systems want right now? They want the one right answer in a box. So they want the quality. That's not what design thinking wants. Design thinking says we can't even begin to imagine what's going to solve the problem for these humans. These are humans in a world where technology has never been seen before. We don't even know what we're going to do with this metaverse thing that's good, right? The possibilities are literally endless. We want quantity over quality. So if you had an idea, you better say it because it's going to get the ball rolling. So the first thing I'll say is that just like when you're having an idea and you shut yourself up, you want to manage that brain power there. And you want to say, no, Mr. Left Brain, we're going to defer judgment. And that's the same thing that's happening when you're drawing, because you're saying, I'm not good enough. You're saying, I can't do this. You're saying, I'm not good at drawing. I don't care that you're good at drawing. I care that you put something on the board that gets the conversation rolling and that we get somewhere with shared common understanding. So that's the first sort of like, let's take care of that.
So helpful,
now,
by the way. So helpful.
Yeah,
good. It's just, yeah, good. I'm so happy. I really do believe in this work. And it's, again, when you see people in corners of the world, from Taiwan to the jungles of the Amazon, these people are looking at me, these educators are looking at me with eyes that are saying, thank you for speaking the things that I couldn't articulate, but that I needed to hear, that my students need to hear. So the resource I'll give you is called the Sketchnote Handbook. And there's also the Sketchnote Workbook. And it really begins with those 5 basic elements: a period, like a dot, a line, that's just a series of dots connected, right? A circle, a triangle, and a square. With just that, and if you can figure out how to put that on a paper or on a piece of whiteboard, then you can sketch note, you can visually communicate. That's all we need from you to be able to do that circle in 2 lines and call it a bird. And for teachers especially, if you look up curriculum sketch notes, you'll find so many beautiful, beautiful examples of teachers that have figured out how different students will respond to a syllabus. If they see a syllabus, you can look up syllabus sketch note. If they see the syllabus with some version of a visual language, because it's not a dense document that they're going to gloss over, it shows them so much more information. Number one, it conveys what the teacher's emotion and what she's trying to convey. But number two, we learn more when it's a visual pairing with the verbal pairing, right? The student is going to remember it more. You're just getting more bang for your buck. Don't sit there talking for 2 hours. Just draw a darn thing on the board and you're going to get farther, much farther along. So examples of sketchnoting is the word you're looking for, sketchnoting. And again, it's just a sketch. It's just
do that, Jerry. You do that, right?
I do. I love sketchnoting. Yes. And again, it's show, don't tell.
Yeah.
And if I sketch note, I remember it so much.
You remember it and your audience remembers it. That's exactly right.
Yes. So I have been listening to you talk, and I am feeling a sense of urgency. Schools need to be doing this because I'm thinking this generation has to solve problems that no other generation has had to solve. Well, let's look at COVID. That's a great example, right? But we have our environment. We have so many things happening in our world right now that no other generation has had to tackle. And I feel like if we would start doing this in schools, we would equip our future leaders. Jessica, what is it you think that our future leaders are going to need and would this process help?
You're absolutely right, Jerry. This is sort of an opportunity. Think of it this way. We have been training our left brain to be very logical and very analytical. But think about that. We're really just training our left brain. That's like using half of our brain power. What we need in this world stepping up, what we need in future leaders, and it's not just me saying this, this is even venture capitalists are reaching down and saying we need what we used to call it was a T-shaped person. That T-shaped person you might have heard is someone that has shaped like a T because they have depth in one area, but they can apply breadth in multiple areas. So they can relate to multiple areas, but they can focus in on one thing. Well, now we're saying, forget the T. We actually need a pie shape, like the Greek letter pi for 3.14. A pie-shaped person has two prongs and they go across, and those two prongs are refer to plugging into your left brain hemisphere and your right brain hemisphere. So isn't it kind of crazy that we're developing students that only know how to properly use, like formally use only one half of their brain? I think that's kind of very inefficient if we want to continue to be the world's superpower. It just doesn't add up to me.
And these illustrations that you're giving us are so helpful. I'm loving these. And I know Jamie's taking notes for her daughter. Yes.
Well, I can even take you one further. What we're developing in our studio at Darte Design, our next model of a future leader doesn't just stop at two prongs. It actually goes on to a third one. And you can imagine a plug, like a power plug, and it plugs in with the little one, the big one, and then the grounding, right? That ground,
yes.
That ground is something we're referring to as bringing in the body experience, bringing in the somatic intelligence. This is about physical intelligence that resides in the body. This is about saying, like, we're not going to ignore our emotions. We know that social emotional intelligence is important. We figured that out now, thankfully. And now so many schools that can afford the programs are moving into incorporating social emotional intelligence. We're just saying the future leader needs to be able to know how to access and manage and even leverage their body intelligence. And this looks like all sorts of things, but even from being able to gather yourself for a moment and just taking that deep breath where you need it can go so far, right? Being able to ground into your body experience, into the earth, into the material world around you, and bring that sense of peace into the moment. As a leader, where learning is becoming indistinguishable with, can you read through an Excel spreadsheet? Because it's just not sufficient anymore. Anyone can read through an Excel spreadsheet, but a real leader is someone that can manage their body's emotions. I've been, again, all over, I was sitting in Thailand with someone who works with professors at MIT. And I said, how do you make big decisions when it comes to really big decisions that are good decisions? And she says, well, I make them from right here. And she was patting her gut. And I said, what do you mean your gut? And she said, well, by the time the decision has reached me, 100 analysts have seen it, and they've all done all the Excel spreadsheet calculations. So it's up to me to use my intuition. God forbid we use this word in our schools, use our intuition to make a big decision. And it'll happen. You'll see, like, expert leaders, Warren Buffett, right? Like, expert leaders do use their intuition, but, like, who's teaching you how to use your intuition? What class did you take that taught you how to do that? Guess what? There are practices, there are techniques and tools to help you tune. I call it fine tuning your intuition and helping you make use of that information. It's information that's in the body, and we just have no idea how to access it. Luckily, there's small pockets of populations that have been accessing this information. And so we're learning how to do that and bring that to a more modernized world, if you will. But anyway, that's my shtick for the future leader, right? You got to use your left brain, you got to use your right brain, and you got to use the body that you're inhabiting, the body that you're bringing in.
Yes, I love that analogy. I even drew a little picture of it. She sketch noted. Yes. Oh, that's a great analogy. So what I'm thinking now is, we know that we have to get started and teachers have to get started. Can you share an example of something you've seen that has been fabulous?
Yeah, sure. I can share a
Maybe
few
kind of
examples.
get this.
Yeah, I mean,
Scene.
in I was working with an amazing preschool center in Santa Monica called Little Dolphins. And shout out to the team. It's an amazing team. And we were charged with putting together a maker space for toddlers, like 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and then 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds using this maker space. And I thought it was such a great opportunity because all we did, you don't need to get, I guess my lesson here is you don't need fancy materials. Often, if you look up in your area, there should be somewhere nearby, hopefully, is a teacher's recycled treasures kind of a space where you can find a lot of recyclables that have been cleaned out and are now being sold for much cheaper. Hopefully, you can acquire a budget to put this together. But all you're doing is formatting these stations where you're developing material, developing a curriculum where the student is allowed to experiment, right? Where you're saying it's okay to get this wrong in this space. It's okay to play with this here. We're going to ask you this question and you're going to design a solution with anything we give you here. And it doesn't matter that it's right or wrong. It matters that the student is able to put together and be resourceful, right? Put together what's around them and have a justification for it, right? So it's very simple stuff. It doesn't require a lot of information. We have so many units that are based on just paper, just using paper to transport a ping pong ball or using paper to, typical building towers with materials. I think when I was working with teachers in Meadowbrook, at the Meadowbrook School of Weston outside of Boston, we learned that we wanted to transform the entire science department. So it was 3 teachers in the middle school science department to have all of their curriculum become design thinking. And what we learned that year is that was a tall order, right? That was a large ask because in fact, it works really well if you can infuse design thinking throughout the curriculum. If you just add to one of your projects some interviews. Where can you get information on an interview? Where might you let a student go interview some population and bring back information and have that legitimately, authentically adapt the outcome of the school project? But the key is to let it be authentic, right? So don't just let them go do the interview and then whatever they say, it doesn't matter, we're still going to do this, right? One thing is the skill building of the interview, but one thing is how do I apply and how do I go back to my person and say, how does this fit? Does this work? Does this not work? So instead of throwing away all your curriculum, which we know is sacred and you've worked so hard on, think about, are there ways that I can influence, that I can infuse design thinking principles in the already existing curriculum that you already know works? If you can work with your school to get a little bit of extra time in the lab, whether it's a makerspace lab or whether it's a tinkering lab or whether it's a science lab, whatever it's called, adding more time in that space so that your students can actually get an experiment wrong and then figure out what can I do differently. That moment is so empowering because you're not telling them what experiment to run. You're telling them, we have to figure out X. How can we figure it out? So in many ways, you already have the bulk of the curriculum ready. You just want to be able to tweak it and find places where you can bring in these mindsets. Things, again, like deferred judgment, things like being visual or showing, not telling, things like quantity over quality, things like empathy or fear of failure, right? So failing early and failing often. If you can just layer that in, then you're already doing the thinking, which is the hard part, right? It's design thinking, not necessarily design doing.
Yeah, well, the next generation science standards actually do have that. They call them science and engineering practices, and they do have them embedded into each of the other discipline areas. So that way, just as you said, it is authentically built in and not some isolated unit, but it's authentically built into everything that they're doing in the rest of the science. So, but it's tricky to make sure that you're continuing to do that and not thinking of it as something extra, but having it authentically built in. You were talking about in the maker spaces and students solving these problems, but what is a wicked problem? I know you've mentioned that before. What is that?
So a wicked problem are the kinds of problems that we're all facing in the real world right now. It's not a problem that you can find an answer to and put it in a box and box it around, because there isn't any one clear answer. The world is a complicated place. There's a lot of complicated individuals at the center of these problems. So when you think about a wicked problem, sort of a New England way of saying wicked hard, right? You're thinking about problems that involve different people and by nature, different perspectives, which means that there isn't going to be any one singular truth. There's going to be different perspectives that you're going to have to reconcile. And so one thing we do a lot in design thinking is that we diverge and then we converge, and we diverge and we converge. And I like to think of like a big trap opening and closing and opening and closing, because what you're doing is that when you're diverging, you're creating as many choices as possible, options for yourself, different ideas. Again, remember, quantity over quality. So this might be happening in a really good brainstorming session. And by the way, we have data from my lab at MIT, from my graduate studies lab at MIT, that correlates that the best ideas come after the most ideas. They don't come at the end, but the quality index of ideas increases the more ideas you have. Imagine that. You're kind of like flushing a system, right? Imagine you have like old pipes in there and you're trying to get these ideas out. So what's going to come out first is the rusty old waters, right? Before you have that good, clean, pristine water. So if that can show, not tell you, that can help visualize the idea for you. We know, science knows that the more ideas you have, the better your ideas will be getting. So you're diverging, you're creating options for yourself. And then you're saying, okay, wait a minute, some decisions have to be made here. And you're thinking, what are my parameters? What are my truths? What did I learn? What do people really need? What do they want? What are their pain points? What is my customer? What is my user really trying to express? And what have they not been able to articulate that I want to test out? So you're going to make these decisions go down and you're going to converge into only a few decisions, only a few choices. And you're going to take some of those choices and you're going to prototype them. And by prototype them, prototype is a Greek word. It just means prototipos. It just means the first version of something. I don't want it to be perfect. Remember, not quality. I don't want it to be perfect. I want it to be some model of something that says, this is what I'm thinking about. Can I give this to you? And can you tell me what you think? Because if I show you that at the beginning, when my idea is still very raw, when you think it's not ready for the world to see, that's exactly when I want to see it. I want to see it when it's raw in its sketch form, right? Because then we can start talking about the idea of it. I don't want to judge you based on the color and the perfect lines and the execution of the delivery of it. I want to figure out, is this going to actually solve my problem? And you can have that conversation with a raw, sketchy idea, a raw model, and that you can learn with the customer. It goes back to fail early, fail often, right? I want to get it wrong as early as possible. I don't want to wait 5 months and get it right at the end. I want to get it wrong on week 2. I want you to tell me exactly in which way it's wrong, because maybe I'll learn something new about what you thought that we never covered in the customer interview. And I'll get to learn about that because of the model that's sitting in front of you that's making you think, oh, you know what? Now that I see it this way, I forgot to mention blah, 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 right? Or this isn't going to work because XYZ, and that XYZ never came up before. So you're just gathering as much information as possible, as early as possible.
That was such a good explanation, because it made me think that brainstorming and all of those ideas, that really is how we get to innovation. Because we get rid of the common things that we're already using and getting to those more pristine ideas that are innovative. That you just brought that to light for me. Thank you.
I think this also establishes what I know as being important, the importance of collaboration, because brainstorming is great, but isn't it even more important to brainstorm with others as well? I mean, I always like to give people their alone time to process. But then after that, you need to come together. And is collaboration a big part of this process in your world, Jessica?
Yes, and see what I did there? I would say yes. Yes, it is a very important part. And I agree with you. I also I think the best practice is to have sort of an individual brainstorm where you get to flush out your ideas and put them on paper first. Again, being as visual as possible about your ideas, as visual as possible, because when you go share your idea with your group, that's when the group brainstorming begins. And that's an even different skill that you're bringing in, which will be building on the ideas of others. So build on the ideas of others is a skill that we don't get to do very often, because how often did I have to do a brainstorm growing up in school,
Right.
which is a shame. So building on on the ideas of others is where you start to say the yes and, right? Where someone gives an idea, and regardless of whether you like it or not, the point is not to get it perfect, right? The point is to build on that and use that as a launch pad to build into another idea. I'm not saying forget it and dismiss it. It'd be great to incorporate it, but even better is that even better than tailoring it and saying, well, that's not going to work because blah, 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 and making sure you get that one down to what's going to work or what's going to be right. Even more important than bringing that idea down is using that idea in its raw form and building on it and creating another idea, because that's going to build on another idea and on another idea and on another idea. And that's where you want the quantity, right? You're
Right.
using the group to build as many ideas as possible, because that's where you're going to get closer as a group to the better ideas.
Yeah, I'm seeing like a beehive kind of like expanding, right? So kind of growing and growing in that way. But I think also a big component of that, and you mentioned this before, is really not judging good, bad, wrong, but instead an idea so you can get that quantity. And it is hard for people not to say, no, that's not going to work, because that's what we typically do. But I think in that brainstorming and in cooperative learning in the classroom, we call it roundtable, and there is no judgment. It's just people throwing out their ideas. It's that brainstorming session. You roundtable it, you write it out, you pass the paper, you keep it going. And there is no right or wrong. It's just a collection of ideas. And I think that's the importance in order to allow for that building and growing and enhancements that can actually occur.
I have to say yes and, because in fact, one of our brainstorming rules is to encourage wild ideas. And when you visualize this there's a brainstorming, it's actually really hard to find brainstorming rules. I'm happy to send you my visual. Back in the day, this is like 12, 14 years ago, I found someone on the internet that had the brainstorming rules, and they had drawn out nice visuals for it and put them in Post-it notes on the window, and they took a picture. So it was a very noisy photo, but I made it a digital photo so that my teachers could also put it easily on the board when they were reminded how to have a good brainstorming session. And when the visual that we use for encourage wild ideas is like a big lion, right? Like something that you think you can't go anywhere near, say it. Go for it, because usually what that does, if you can imagine mathematically, is that you're operating in this range of ideas, but then I'm going to throw out this crazy idea that lands all the way over here, and you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, if we can do that, then we can do all of this too. And so now all of this becomes a potential pathway, a potential realm of possibility, right? So encouraging these wild ideas, exactly because quantity over quality, it's going like you think it's I think that teachers, and not just teachers, most adults, I think, will think that these wild ideas are distractions or inefficient, because how could you ever get to that? And to their point, we were taught to give the one right answer in a perfect box. But this is honoring a completely different part of our brain that we haven't yet been taught to work with. And this is teaching our students to work with this part of the brain. So the rules are different. The rules of the game are different. And the rules here are that the more crazy ideas you have, science has proven, the better your ideas will be. I know it sounds crazy because of what we were taught, but the more ideas you have, the better your ideas will be.
And it goes back to the Henry Ford quote that you said in the beginning of the podcast. If everyone, were asked what they would want a faster horse, right? Not even imagining that outside possibility, and look where we've gone, right? So amazing. Oh, this was really, really good. And I needed this because I was so kind of just like tired from the day and lists of things to do. And this just re-energized me so much, Jessica. Thank you. Really great.
Jessica, your illustrations, although you didn't draw them, but the way you said them just brought to life the thinking behind design thinking.
Yeah.
And that was really, really good.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up our show, we always like to ask our guests this question. In all of your work with design thinking, what has become clear to you?
I like that question. I think it's a couple of things, if I may. I think one of them we already hit on, how approachable this is. When I got to design thinking, I myself did not consider myself a designer in any way, shape, or form. So I felt like an imposter. But I started to realize how accessible this was, how human. Design thinking is so human. It's just requiring you to lean in. I mean, if you look at the curiosity of a 4-year-old, they'll walk up to anybody and offer their lunch, offer their candy. Hey, do you want to play with me? It's just such a human way of doing it. So if you're ever in doubt, remember that you're going back to the basics here. And some part of that is going to feel like you're undoing 16 years of schooling that you were trained in to act a certain way. But again, this is a brand new space. This is a brand new second hemisphere of your brain. And that requires, by nature, that requires different rules to engage, right? So it's a different game altogether. But never be fooled that you are a design thinker. You were always a design thinker. You've already been a design thinker. And I think if I could empower teachers that might hopefully embark on this journey, just start Googling design thinking. There's some resources that we've provided. Start Googling design thinking, start getting your teeth wet with it. I would just say, don't be intimidated by it. Sometimes it's a lot of these like big words that honestly Stanford has branded so that they have their whole, design thinking school, which I am so proud of them to take the initiative. And there's a K through 12 initiative at the design thinking school at Stanford. It's important work. I've given conference paper presentations there as well. There's a Fab Learn conference for people that are more interested in like the Fab Labs or the maker spaces. So there's a Fab Learn conferences coming out of Stanford as well. I think it's such important work, but don't forget that just like anything on the internet, it's easy to brand it and rebrand it and then rebrand it again. And so you might see the same thing in like 4 different ways. It's simple, this stuff is very simple and to the bare bones, and you can do it too. And it's so approachable. I mean, I'd love to help in any way. I know that there's a large communities online of teachers learning how to do this for themselves and making it work. So you can do it too.
Oh, that's great. That is a great thought to end with too today. And Jessica, if you have links that you would like to share, please send them our way and we'll have those in the show notes for our listeners.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for
Jessica.
Today.
Thank you.
And before the show, Jessica said she wasn't feeling well and she was hoping she could bring her best self forward. And I said, Jessica, on the day you're not feeling well, you're more than most people are when they're 100%. And I think you proved that to us today.
Wow. I don't think I can handle Jessica feeling great.
Maybe it's better this way, right?
Oh,
thank you both so much. I think your work is so incredibly important. I know that as a teacher, I would have loved to have a podcast like LinkedUp. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your work. Every podcast seems to be pulling some right strings. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.